All right, everyone, welcome back to ICU. Today I have Madelaine Golec with me. She is a pelvic health physiotherapist from Ontario, Canada. So, welcome to the show. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, firstly. And yeah, so I'm a practicing pelvic floor physiotherapist. I'm kind of spread out across the GTA, which we would say the Greater Toronto area. And I've been practicing in pelvic health since 2014. So it's been a while.
Sure has. Yeah, I was looking at your website and it was saying how you have a couple different locations that you work with patients.
Yes, so I actually just recently sold my clinic and yeah, now I'm just working for a friend, working at the clinic and kind of slowly starting my own thing closer to home because my commute now has turned into from 45 minutes to, depending on what time I have to leave, to an hour and a half. And I was like, with a kid at home and been doing this commute for 20 years, I was like, I think it's time for doing something different.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I get that. And I've noticed because I we've known each other for the past, I don't know, 4 years of being like in the online space in the pelvic health world. And you're going through a transition right now because you're stepping into the role of the pelvic health lady. So that's
Yes.
exciting. Do you want to talk more about what made you want to kind of step into that?
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I did start a YouTube channel a long time ago under the pelvic health lady because while I had the clinic, I also was like, what is my brand? Right. And so I kind of started it and put it on the wayside just because trying to run a clinic required me to focus on like the business side. And that really didn't give me a whole lot of extra time or space to like really think about my brand and what my values are and what I want to achieve as a pelvic floor physiotherapist. So when I made the decision that I was going to sell the business, I really was like, what do I want to do? Like, what do I want my brand? And I had already had the pelvic health lady, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to revive this, and it just has like a good roll off the tongue, like the pelvic health lady. And so I turned not only that as my brand, but as my business, um, to basically focus specifically on pelvic health, because when I was in the business, I was kind of treating everybody and everything because that's what the business sort of required me to do. So my transition now is to try to really hyper focus and niche down to bladder, because when I looked at my practice over a 10-year span, like I was like, who are the clients that I see the most? Like, and I work with two urologists from Mississauga, and like they refer me clients. And I was like, I just was seeing these patients with these bladder symptoms. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just dive really deeply into just treating bladder. It's not that I don't look at other things, because there's always more than one thing that shows up when it comes to the pelvic floor. But I wanted to make sure that the clientele base that I was speaking to make it easier for me to speak to the same person, was looking at what are the bladder symptoms that I see most often: frequency, urgency, bladder leakage, waking up at night. Yes, pain and discomfort. Um, but I was treating mostly men with pain and discomfort, like the non bacterial chronic prostatitis, which is now been relabeled as chronic pelvic pain syndrome, or CPPS, because they sort of realized it's not really about the prostate, but more about like the pelvic floor, the nervous system, and lifestyle. So that's what I've decided. I'm gonna like dive really deeply, and so I sold the business like two the three two 3 months ago. So this year is all dedicated to getting into the latest research, mentorship, and like really trying to kind of nail down um, what have been the most kind of successful approaches to helping people.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your content recently because you are really diving into the topic of overactive bladder a lot.
Hmm.
Um, just from what I've seen, really good information and tips that you're putting out. And I know you and I were chatting before this episode of like, what do we talk about? And I feel like that is a topic that both of us have been focusing a lot on recently. So it made the most sense, right?
Absolutely. Well, that and you know, looking at your content, I know a lot of focus has been on interstitial cystitis and painful bladder syndrome, and I see also adding in because I mean, there's overlap in the symptom presentation, right? So I just figured why not get two people from two different kind of disciplines sort of meeting together, being like, where's the overlap between the disciplines and what can be added in to kind of have that more holistic approach.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think a great place for us to start, since a majority of my audience has IC, is let's talk about the difference between IC and overactive bladder, OAB. Do you want to kind of share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think the symptom presentation, from what I've seen, like the subjective reporting of people's experiences, um, with respect to interstitial cystitis, of course, I tend to see that there's like a pain component, like a lot more pain and discomfort versus an overactive bladder is more tends to be associated with like a feeling of irritation, like I really need to go pee. It's more around like signaling to go to the washroom and feeling um, that you need to go frequently versus like a pain and discomfort. Like I suppose I haven't had clients describe the sudden urgency as painful. They describe it as I feel like I'm going to pee my pants, right? So I
Mhm.
kind of look at that distinction is more like, is this like a pain and discomfort? And like what other subjective reporting might lead to bladder pain syndrome or interstitial cystitis versus overactive bladder, you know, would be more of lack of discomfort for me, but you can also share your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, my thoughts are similar. I kind of, my brain likes to really simplify it. And it's like, I see, okay, we have pain. That is one of the hallmark symptoms. People can get frequency and urgency, but a lot of it is mostly pain and discomfort driven. And then with OAB, it's like, usually there isn't that pain there, but like you were saying, like that strong urge, that discomfort, feeling like your bladder's going to explode. I say that because that's how
Yeah,
I used to feel with OAB. And also, there can be a component of leakage slash incontinence to that, right?
absolutely. Yeah. So it
Is
doesn't
there a,
necessarily have to include bladder leakage, but it certainly can. Yes.
yeah, I'm wondering, is there a statistic you know about of how many people with OAB have leakage?
Oh, that's a good question. I was just looking up I was looking at statistics more from the perspective of like how many people sort of experience overactive bladder, and I know that sits anywhere between like 14 to 18% of the population. Because I wanted to kind of get a sense of, I was like, how many Canadians? And I was like, I was going to do the math, and I never did. Um, but off the top of my head, I honestly don't have that number of how many people have leakage on top of overactive bladder symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm also thinking about like how many people with IC also have OAB. There's a lot of statistics I'd love to get, but I'm sure we're just not there yet.
Well, yeah. I mean, research is still an ongoing thing just because there's so many people suffering that, you know, we're constantly looking to find better ways of classifying and figuring out like what are the pillars that are contributing symptom presentation and things of that nature. But yeah, I don't have that particular number off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, it would be interesting. But okay, so let's dive into OAB and talk a little bit about like what is causing these symptoms of frequency and urgency and leakage, because with IC it's like a big giant question mark. Okay, we have some theories, but with OAB there's more like concrete evidence, right?
Yeah. So, when I look at clients coming in, I am looking at what are the commonalities, like what are the common pillars that I see of clients coming in. And so, what I would say, certainly, like diet and lifestyle are going to play a huge, huge role in irritability of the bladder. I mean, if you think of systemic inflammation, if we think of bladder irritants, right? There seems to be a common thread of things that, for some people, depending on their sensitivity, they will find that these things are irritating. So I'll be looking at diet and lifestyle, exercise, sleep quality. So all your lifestyle factors is, I think, an important pillar. Other things that I C is nervous system dysregulation. So, not necessarily anxiety or a diagnosed anxiety disorder. However, there's stress, right? And maybe there isn't stress and anxiety right away. Maybe it's, somebody has a bladder infection that gets treated with antibiotics, that gets resolved, but the symptom presentation kind of hangs out for a little while. And then people develop like a conditioned response or a stress response, like to a particular food item or to a particular place, that then feeds into a stress cycle, right? Because urge sensation feels like you're going to pee your pants, right? So it becomes kind of threatening and stressful, like, ooh, now I'm going to change my toileting behavior. Like, I'm going to go pee just in case, to make sure I don't have a sudden urge to pee while I'm out. But then that feeds into then capacity issues. So, like, there tends to be a stress and a worry component that comes with overactive bladder that then leads to toileting behaviors. So we look at toileting behaviors. Now, there could be issues with toileting behavior prior to the development, like constipation, or maybe you had a bladder leakage incident that you want to then avoid, right? So that becomes kind of the stress triggers, like, I don't want to leak, so I'm going to empty out my bladder more frequently, and I'm going to and then ultimately what ends up happening is you end up training your bladder to go more often, right? Because our brain's pretty smart. It starts to pick up on that signal and goes, oh, did you want me to tell you that you need to pee a little bit sooner? Because you seem to be going at this particular frequency. And then the nervous system and the brain will make appropriate adjustments to be more efficient. So we look at toileting behavior, we look at bowel health, we look at, certainly, I screen for things like anxiety, depression, nervous system dysregulation, because that can be a component that contributes to the development of overactive bladder syndrome. And then you got pelvic floor, right? We have the musculature. So, somebody could start with low back pain, and they're maybe, bracing or tensing in the acute phase to sort of support their back, not realizing that, there's a low back muscle that's directly connected to the pelvic floor, which is directly connected to the abdominal wall, which is directly connected to the diaphragm. And I kind of think of those four muscle groups as little gears in a watch. So if one of them is overactive and starting to like be a little bit more, moving, well, the other ones are going to respond as well. And now the watch as a whole isn't operating in its optimal fashion. So all that is to say, like, it could start with low back pain, protective strategies of tensing, resulting over time in pelvic floor hypertone, meaning it's very kind of lifted. And because the pelvic floor is like a hammock, right, it can sort of lift up the organs, right? So the bladder's sitting here, and on top of that is like the intestines, right? So now it's like the bladder has this extra pressure coming from the top and the bottom. And if we're, sucking in our stomachs or like bracing through our stomach, You know, it's like a water balloon inside a big balloon. And when all the walls are closing in, that's a lot of pressure on the bladder, which can then lead to feeling like a sudden urge. And oh my goodness, if I have a sudden urge, I want to tense even more to like hold it in to make it to the washroom. And sometimes those muscles fatigue, they get overwhelmed, and then a leak can happen. Then, if a leak happens, then I don't want that to happen in the future. And this cycle kind of continues.
Hmm.
That was a long winded answer. Hopefully, that made
No,
a lot of sense.
it did. And you brought up a lot of things that are really similar to my work with people with IC. And the top two root causes among my clients are typically nervous system dysregulation and pelvic floor dysfunction. And usually the two go together. So I would love to dive deeper into the nervous system component to this. Now, if someone is listening to this and you have no idea what nervous system dysregulation is, I have done past episodes on it, episode 59 and I believe 65 would be the ones to check out, but we are going to talk about it more in terms of its relation to OAB. So, Madelaine, if you wouldn't mind kind of starting, I don't even know the best way to explain this, but how does the nervous system contribute to OAB symptoms?
Okay. So, as both you and I know, this is a complex interplay of different parts of the nervous system. So, I suppose what I'll say is we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight system. Okay. And that part of the system is going to speak to, let's say, the sphincters of the bladder and the bladder neck, making sure that everything's held tightly so that our bladders can sort of fill up. And neurologically, that's it, where the nerves go. Then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest, digest, and repair system. But that system has kind of like two different branches, right? The rest, digest, and repair when we feel safe, right? When we feel safe, we're at ease, we want to socialize, we are calm, our system is kind of like not flaccid but not super tight, it's just kind of like feels right in the middle. So there's that part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And then the other part is kind of the shutdown part, the immobilization part, the part that is like absolute survival mode, where the only function is to make sure your heart's beating and your lungs are breathing. And all the other systems is about conserving energy. So more flaccid, you might notice like hopelessness and low motivation and just like really, really kind of tired, overtired, but like not rested. So the parasympathetic nervous system allows for things to move, right? So it's how our bladder empties and how our bowels fill empty out as well. So when these systems, I kind of think of it like a stoplight system, right? Where you have the green light is your safety when everything is cool, copacetic, and calm. You have the yellow system, which is kind of like your warning system, right? It's your like alarm system, proceed with caution. And I allude that to sort of your fight or flight system, where it's like be alert. There could be a danger in your environment, or something's kind of happening internally that like you need to pay attention to. And then you have your red light. And your red light is really when the system has become completely and utterly overwhelmed and simply can no longer give out any further energy. Like you've exhausted the tank. And so oftentimes what I'll see is sort of we live in a busy world. We got lots of things going on. We have different demands on our system, both internally and externally in the environment, socially. And so we're kind of, like sort of in the sort of in the yellow, kind of most of the time. When we get overwhelmed by the yellow, we tend to go into this like numbing, right? To soothe ourselves, we sort of numb these unpleasant overactivity in our system. Like we just don't feel settled. And so because we don't feel settled, we kind of want to zone out rather than sort of look at the pieces of like, why am I so agitated and why is everything the way that it is, to kind of work through that piece. So I kind of will oftentimes see this bouncing back and forth between the accelerator of a car and pulling the emergency brake versus the green light, right? Finding cues of safety in our environment, finding cues of safety within our body, really helping to calm that internal agitation. That would be our green light. And that would be like gently applying the brake while sort of taking your foot off the accelerator. So it's sort of like when you're on the gas pedal and pulling the emergency brake, gas pedal, pulling the emergency brake, you can imagine that your like the communication inside your body is going to be very dysregulated and sort of jarring, right? Which over time, maybe it might not be initially, but over time, that's going to lead to, you know, not proper functioning of your immune system, your hormone system, your nerves, your digestion, your sleep, your all of these systems are going to get basically at some point overwhelmed and tired, and then they won't function properly anymore. I don't know, how does that sound for you? Have I missed anything with respect to like the nervous system?
No, no, I'm just like imagining the polyvagal chart that I always look at with the red, the
Yeah.
yellow, and the green. And I love that. I'm someone who's been in fight or flight like the majority of my life. And that theory really stuck with me because, as humans, we're meant to, there will be stress no matter what you do. You can't avoid stress, whether it's like something small or something on a larger scale. And so your nervous system is meant to flow through all of these different states. Like fight or flight is something that's natural, but you need to return back to that calm state. Now, for a lot of us with these issues like IC and OAB, we are getting stuck in either the fight, flight, freeze response, whatever that may be. And that what's happening there is your nervous system doesn't believe that you are safe. It believes there's a constant threat following you around, and it's not going to know that it's safe to heal or safe to do what it needs to do. And that presents in so many different ways. It could be bladder symptoms, digestive issues, whatever that may be.
Yeah, IBS being an example in the, in the digestive system. If it's in the sort of musculoskeletal system, it sometimes can present as fibromyalgia type, like where you just have like pains in many different parts of your body, without it sort of like being able to see a structural cause. And, I like to, when I talk about the nervous system, it's difficult because there really isn't like a test. Like you can't just go for a blood test and be like, oh, your nervous system is, dysregulated. I mean, we, like in my practice, I'll use questionnaires, and I'm looking in those questionnaires, I'm looking at the physiology, right? Because most of my clients, like they'll be like, well, I'm not really that stressed or not that much more stressed than I usually, you know what I mean? Like we don't, when we think about stress cognitively, we're like, well, it's not that really, like there's nothing major happening in my life. But physiologically, when I look at their questionnaires and it's like, I don't sleep well, I have tension in my shoulders and my neck, I clench my jaw, my legs are restless, I can't quite settle down. Those to me are physiological signs of stress, that the nervous system is sort of wound up. And so that's how I kind of take a look at, is this person's system just really kind of revved up? And do we need to find ways of creating safety? And of course, when we talk about overactive bladder, right, a lot of what feels unsafe is, what if I have an accident in public? Or maybe I've had one accident and now it's like, I don't ever want to feel the embarrassment of that type of situation happening. And so, then that funnels into, again, more frequency, which can then lead to more urgency. And now I'm waking up at night because my daytime capacity of holding is so low that now my nighttime capacity is low. While urine production decreases somewhere around 50% at nighttime. If you're peeing every 2 hours, maybe you're getting up every 3 to 4 hours at night. Like we're meant to be able to hold our bladders for 3 or so hours, 3 to 4 hours. But again, if we're looking at bladder irritants, like and I know, our clients decrease their water intake when they have urgency and frequency. And what we don't realize is that can actually contribute to more frequency and urgency, because the threat level from inside the bladder could be that the urine concentration's so high that at some point the body can't neutralize the acidity or the concentration, and it goes, well, now just get it out, right? Like, get it out. I can't neutralize this anymore, and we'll feel like a sudden urge to pee. So we can have external cues and we can have internal cues of irritation. So we want to make sure that we're drinking enough water, diluting our concentration of urine, you know, drinking water around bladder irritants. So I'll even say to clients, like, I know you don't want to give up your coffee. And I'm like, let's not do that just yet, but let's see if we can drink water before and after and keep that water intake consistently to dilute the amount of that irritant in the lining. Then perhaps the bladder won't be so threatened and want to like squeeze it out,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And I think something that I've been noticing, I mean, lately I've just been noticing it more, is that I'll see people in support groups who are like, I'm struggling with these symptoms, what can I take to get rid of them, or what procedure can I do? And it's like we're so focused on medication, supplements, procedures, but what really, yes, those things can get you relief, most likely short term, but what we all want is long term relief. And in order to get that long term relief from your symptoms, you need to dive deeper into some of these things, especially the nervous system, especially the pelvic floor. And it's going to require work. It's going to require consistency. And it's not going to be a quick fix. I want to say that right off the bat, because people are like, "Oh my God, I'm meditating. It's not helping me," and they want to give up. And it's with this stuff, you really need to stick with it for a while.
Right. Yeah. And if we think about the quick fix, like when I hear that, like I already can kind of feel my nervous system upregulated, because there's like a speed, right? So one of the things that I would associate with the yellow light is speed. When I'm in a hurry, when I'm busy, when I'm rushing, I'm not calm and relaxed, right? Like at that point I'm sort of thinking, I don't know if this is going to work. I hope it works. There's, and that in and of itself can be perceived, right? Doesn't necessarily mean it is a threat, but it's a perceived threat. Like, what if I don't, how quickly can I get this better? Right? Which makes it then difficult because it might suppress, like, medications or procedures may sort of suppress, because it's sort of can work on the brain and nervous system, like, oh, I'm taking this thing, it's making me better, so then my whole nervous system settles down. But if we're not looking at sort of the root cause over time, the system will slowly build back up, and now it's like, oh no, this is now a failed treatment. Oh, there must be something seriously wrong with me because I didn't do well on this medication or this supplement or this procedure, which then is like can create more agitation in the system. So, sometimes I think medications can be really, really helpful with this idea of, in the short term, I'm using these things to create some calm in my system while I'm implementing these longer term strategies to create the conditions that actually allows my body to heal and sustain that that regulation over long periods of time, where I may be able to wean myself, let's say, off of supplements or off of medications slowly, because I've spent the time and the energy to implement these particular strategies, right? We also know that medications sometimes don't work, right? It's like, we'll try this one, then we'll try that one, then we'll try that one. And sometimes those clients end up in my office because, their specialists are like, we've given you everything. There isn't any other medication to give you. So maybe you can try some pelvic floor physio, right? And and that's where we start to work on, those things. And my hope one day in the future is that, like, that's just a given, right? Whether it's like something's going on, it's like, while we're trying to figure out and rule out the big, bad, and the ugly, which is really important to rule out. It's like, well, let's start with these other therapeutic approaches so that we don't develop these long-term patterns that they're going to take time to decondition. Or, maybe we talk about bladder retraining, right? Like, if your bladder has been trained to behave a certain way for a months, years, decades, it's going to take time to create a new neural pathway of safety and working through that these triggers are not dangerous, and we can relax and release. And a lot of it is educating yourself to understand how the system works, so you understand why you're doing the techniques and the way you're doing them. And most of these require consistency in order to write a new pattern, right? I read somewhere that it's like in something like 300 repetitions for muscle memory and 3,000 repetitions for embodiment, right? Where you sort of, it's like automatic. So if you think of a violin player, right? It's like in the beginning, you're like, where do I put my fingers? And you're concentrating super hard in the beginning. And you're like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get this. But if you practice very consistently, all of a sudden you see these people, they're like reading their notes, they're looking at the conductor, and their fingers just, their whole body knows what it needs to do. But it's time and repetitions in.
Yeah, that's so true. That made me think about when I started using my pelvic wand. At first, I had to really remember to use it, and then eventually it just became that muscle memory of like, okay, I take a shower, I use my wand. And then now, if I take a shower, I'm looking for my wand. Like I'm still doing it on a daily basis because it's part of the routine.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it just requires us to develop a different pattern, a different routine to keep things in a optimized position. And the brain is sort of a little bit lazy. Like, the brain wants to go down the path of least resistance. So it wants to go back in its like default network because that requires the least amount of energy, right? And if we already have a tendency to hold more tension, part of our routine is to check in and make sure that we're letting it go, letting it release, and staying that way, right? So, again, over time, facilitating the likelihood that the brain's going to be like, this is normal tone, up here is not normal tone, this is normal tone. But it might require us to keep reminding the system, no, no, we're down here now. So
Mm-hmm.
you may be using a wand for a period of time. And if you skip a day, hopefully it's like, okay, the brain remembers that it's still supposed to, you know, be down here. And I obviously assume you have other, ways of working your pelvic floor through pelvic floor breathing and these other aspects as well that you can utilize if you end up skipping a day or forgetting.
For sure. And a big part of that for me, as a perfectionist, and I know probably 99% of my audience describe themselves as perfectionists. And you have to just give yourself grace on those times where you're not doing the thing you want to be doing. And it's not like a 100-mile-per-hour race to get to the finish line. Like you're going to have some bumps in the road. You just need to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up and you'll get there. I think it's worth mentioning how important support is on
Yes.
someone's journey, because when you're doing something alone, it's really easy to want to give up when things get difficult. But if you have a support system or someone in your life with OAB or something else you're going through that can check in with you, be like, hey, are you doing your exercises? Are you working on this stuff? To really hold you accountable, I think makes you more likely to succeed at whatever goal you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think with support from other individuals, it can help to remove some uncertainty. Because, when we're working on different techniques, we might encounter body sensations that are new, right? And is like, and then the question becomes, well, is this normal? Did I, should I be doing something different? And when that uncertainty sort of is there, well, we're back in the yellow light, right? So we're not calm in our mind, we're not going to be calm in our body, our bladder's not going to be calm, right? I read that somewhere. It's like when you have a calm mind and a calm body, your bladder will be calm.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think having that support to be able to, ask, questions in a trusted, safe community, because, and I say that because, I'll have clients come in and tell me they went on Reddit or they went to Google, and I worry sometimes about the information because, again, I worry about the red light, the yellow and red light when people talk about certain things without kind of the whole context of their experience, because everybody's experience is going to be very different. Their physiology is different. The way the body responds to techniques is going to be different. And, the healing journey really is about feedback. And I think it's important, for people listening, when you're starting the healing journey, and you're working with dietary change or lifestyle change or even pelvic floor physiotherapy, we sort of we have our go-tos, right? We have our go-to strategies and exercises and things like, okay, we see this, okay, let's try this technique. And sometimes we can get it in our mind like, oh, this therapy isn't working because this technique didn't work. And I want to reframe that the healing journey, that when you implement something, it's about getting feedback about how your body is responding to something. Without that feedback, how can you kind of siphon through what are the techniques that work for me and what techniques don't work for me? And it can be okay if a technique doesn't work or a medication doesn't work. It doesn't mean that nothing will ever work. But sometimes, clients will, be like, oh, the exercises my therapist gave me didn't work, I'm not going back. And it's like, well, the therapist doesn't have the opportunity to be like, oh, okay, what was it about that didn't work? Was it the timing? Was it the pressure? Can you show me how you were doing it? And if it's like, oh, that's just not for you, it's like that stone got turned over, and it's like, okay, that's not the right stone. But we have other techniques and strategies that will work. It's just, you know, um, there's the science and there's like the art of application, right? So keeping in mind to have a open and kind and self-compassionate approach to the healing journey, and really approaching it from a sense of curiosity. I'm curious about how is my body responding? And that's where, in Google, it's like, oh, I tried the wand and it didn't work for me. And it did this, 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 and this. Well, we have no context under which, how did that person use it? What instructions they were given, um, what they should be looking out for. Maybe they need to ease. And so we want to be careful on these forums sometimes with what people are saying is or is not working, because that may not necessarily be true for you. And so we want to be careful that we're not leaving certain aspects, you know, undiscovered, because it could be the answer for you, but you should sort of consider working with somebody so you have a little bit more information and context around why you're doing it, what you should be looking out for. I don't know. Anything you want to add to that part?
Yeah, so many thoughts, but when I think about my personal journey of overcoming OAB and IC, it's like there were so many things that I completely wrote off in the beginning, like PT, diet changes, the nervous system, like stress management, things like that. And I just genuinely did not believe that they were going to help me. But what ended up, because it took me years and then I eventually circled back, let's use the physical therapy as an example. I didn't understand the science behind why PT can be helpful. I didn't understand how the pelvic floor works, how it can contribute to my bladder pain, my frequency, my urgency. Once I had that knowledge, it all really clicked for me and it made me more motivated to want to go back to PT. So I made that appointment. I started doing my homework at home and feeling motivated to do that and using my wand. And I ended up getting results from not only that, but a combination of other things. But for me, it was the education is huge, and then just the application, and again, the support that you most likely will need if you do come across bumps in the road, because chances are you will have obstacles that you need to face, and not viewing that as failure, but learning from that and using, let's say you try something and you have a flare up. Like, we need to view that as feedback from our body, start listening to what our body is telling us, and just like tuning into our bodies more. I think a lot of people are not doing that. And I think they're really doing a disservice to themselves.
And to add to that, you know, people want to get better, right? So I think it's important to, like, first and foremost acknowledge people do want to get better, and so they want to get better as quickly as possible, which is so normal, right? It's so normal. And sometimes we're in the moment and we're not maybe necessarily fully present to the techniques we're doing, and we're maybe rushing through because we're like trying to get it in. We got to get the kids somewhere, or we got to, there's a whole multitude of reasons. And so when a flare up comes, looking that as, again, feedback that says, okay, I wonder why, like looking at the whole context. And I'll often say to clients, the most difficult part is we're not fortune tellers ourselves, and our therapists are not fortune tellers. We can't always predict what the response is going to be a couple of hours later. And so, we often will say, like, try to go gentle, as gentle as you can. But sometimes you're like in the treatment room and everything's completely fine. We're in your pain tolerance. We're not really doing anything aggressive. But a couple of hours later, the system goes, "What was that?" Right? And also, sometimes when we do release work and things like that, there can be some soreness. Like if a muscle's super tight, right? And when I finally release it, like I don't know if you've ever experienced this, you go in and you have like a tight knot in your shoulder and you go for a massage and they like really work it out. And then like later on that night and the next day, you're like, whoa, I'm really sore from that. And it's like, there's a lot of buildup of like toxins and stuff in that muscle that has to also get out, right? And depending on your sensitivity, right? Because we have chemical receptors in our tissues. So if all of a sudden we have like this like inflammatory, like these cells on the move, trying to get into the circulatory system so they can get kind of flushed out, the fact that you've opened things up and things are on the move, that can set off your like chemical receptors. And then your body might have like a nervous system response to a sensation you were either not anticipating, or you feel uncertain if it's normal. So it becomes part of that yellow red light that you then have a nervous system response around. So there can be these things, and all that is to say is, oh, now if I'm gonna try it, so you wait till the soreness obviously settles, and you utilize all your techniques that help to decrease the flare, and you do your self-care, and when things settle, it's like, I'm gonna go like 50 to 60% less than what I did the first time, just to see if the response is different. And then if it's like, oh, I'm okay, it's like that was the baseline where you need to work and then incrementally increase from there. It's just like trying to find what is your baseline can have some flares.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess to kind of round out this conversation about the nervous system, I've shared a lot of tips through my social media account and on here about like what I recommend to do to work towards regulating your nervous system. Like, I'm curious to hear what you are recommending to your patients about this.
Yeah. Well, I'll use, urge as an example, because that's the place where people get really tripped up. And, I will start off with visualization and deep breathing. because if we're not calm in our mind and calm in our body, our bladder's not going to calm. And one of the things we know about the bladder reflex is that it will fatigue out, like that urge sensation will decrease over time, but oftentimes we don't give it the time to see that it can come down. So what we want to do is create a condition of controlling our breathing as a way to communicate back to the brain, I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. And because of the diaphragm's connection to the autonomic nervous system, to the nervous system. So I'll get people to breathe, but I will also get them to visualize, like physically making space for the bladder, because as soon as they stand up and feel like a strong urge, the inclination is to tense everything and hold on for dear life. And I find that that then increases the likelihood that you're not going to make it to the washroom. So it's so counterintuitive, and I'll tell my patients it's super counterintuitive for you to pause and actually breathe. So the visualization I will often use is like, imagine your bladder is a water balloon at the bottom of a big balloon, which is your abdominal wall. When you breathe, you want that abdominal wall to expand and give the water balloon space to kind of stretch out without the resistance. Right? So the bladder wants to expand, but we're so tight that it's like this resistance between a push and a pull. And that can make it very difficult for you to make it to the washroom. So I will always say, it's like, if you're sitting and you get a sudden urge, don't get up. If you're standing, stand very still. If you're walking, stop walking. And first and foremost, really think about inhale through the nose and really allow, like physically feel your abdominal wall and your ribs expand. And when you exhale, try to exhale through the mouth twice as long. And I will get people to try to exhale with this idea of right? Because we want to convince our nervous system and our brain that, like, we've gotten away from the saber-toothed tiger, right? Like, we've gotten away from the threat. And what do we do when we've finished a race or we've gotten away from a situation? We're like, oh, thank God. Oh, that was really tough. But there's this postural release that happens. So I will try to get clients to, like, really allow themselves to drop their shoulders, let go of their jaw because it's connected to the pelvic floor, really allow the posture, like, your back muscles and your stomach to just let go just a tiny, tiny bit. And if you can just get really good at taking, let's say, 5 to 10 deep breaths, most of my clients will say that the urge sensation became more manageable. For some people, the urge sensation can go away completely. And I'll say, great, don't go to the washroom, because now we're bladder retraining. And if they have frequency, we want to increase the space in between their urination. So if the sensation goes away, wait till the next time you feel an urge. If the sensation to go pee, and I mean, I have other steps that they typically follow once they build their confidence. Again, creating that delay, even at the end of the steps, if they need to go pee, that's totally okay. But it's not like signal, pee. It's like signal, wait, 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 and then go pee.
Mm-hmm.
And
Would
so we work
you,
on
sorry, no, go ahead, finish your
retraining.
thought.
I was just gonna say, and that's how we work on kind of retraining, right? And once you kind of establish that you can manage your urge sensation, then we can address the, like, peeing just in case, and then whatever leakage might be happening, we can totally address that. But it's like, in OAB, I like to target first, like, the urge sensation and get that under control. Then we work on all the subsequent symptoms.
Right. I would say, yeah, a really common complaint is that urge, because that just drives you absolutely insane. And I personally remember getting that feeling at night when I laid down in bed. And my question to you was, would you recommend the same techniques for that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I will often try to combine some nighttime routine, like some hands-on, massage techniques or some stretches or something preemptively before bedtime to, open up space and create more flexibility, more regulation in the system. But people are still going to wake up in the middle of the night. So I think one of the things, and I mean, I've had certainly experiences like of having a one too many of the carbonated La Croix drinks, and then I was like laying down in bed, and I'm like, why do I feel like I need to pee? And it was like really irritating. So what I say about nighttime is when you wake up and you feel a sensation to urinate, I will often tell my clients like, don't open your eyes yet, right? It's like you're awake, but like try to keep your eyes closed. Try to focus still on the breath and create the space while you're sort of saying, no, I don't need to go pee. And I mean, this is also pending you haven't had fluids right before bed and bladder irritants. So like there's other things to it, but pending, it's just a signal to go pee. Don't open your eyes. And then when you exhale, allow yourself to consciously almost try to drift back into the dark. It's like try to let go of the tension, try to, become physical dead weight and try to drift deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkness, right? Like let the eyes relax and start to roll back as you're practicing this breathing. So the purpose of the breathing is like, can I get myself to go back to sleep? And I may have them work on one or two techniques. Again, if you're going to get up in the middle of the night, again, what we want to do is be gently stretching the bladder just a little bit. So we don't want to have the signal and get up right away. So it's like if you can fall back asleep, amazing. If not, it's like do your deep breathing after 10 to 15 breaths. If it's like I still need to go pee, then just like try to calmly get up and go, I can make it. My bladder, I'm in control of my bladder, and keeping your body super relaxed. Go pee, come back to sleep. So we try to do some things like prior to bed to set up, conditions for better sleep. But if you're going to be waking up, I still use similar um, cues, but with the focus of like when you exhale, it's like imagine you're exhaling back into the sleep.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's great, and I think I'm hung up on my memory of being in college and laying down in my dorm to go to sleep, and would have to pee, so I would go pee, and then I'd come back, and then immediately I would feel like there's like one drop of urine in my bladder, and I would just get in this cycle of like getting up, going back, getting up. So if somebody's struggling to fall asleep, is there any other tips that you have for that circumstance?
Oh boy. Well, I will usually say that, that extra feeling of like needing that extra drop or two. So first and foremost, it's important to know that you can't really fully empty everything out. Like there's always going to be a little bit of residual volume, because I think sometimes clients have it in their mind that like even if there's a drop, it must mean I'm not fully empty, and then they'll go to the toilet and a little bit will come out, and it won't matter. You could go back 15 times and there will still always be like a little bit that comes out. So I just wanted to clarify that it's completely normal to have a little bit, of urine left behind. And remember that our kidneys are constantly producing urine. So um, I will oftentimes, again, I will come back to the deep breathing, and certainly will come back to pelvic floor breathing. Because again, if the pelvic floor has retightened up, like, oh my goodness, am I going to get back to sleep? What's tomorrow going to be like? I'm going to be super tired. Again, if we're sort of in that yellow light, we it can upregulate the pelvic floor. So there could be tension, and that tension in and of itself can make you feel incomplete. So if you can release through pelvic floor relaxation the tension around the bladder, sometimes that can be really helpful. If not, I will then switch to some different nervous system regulation techniques. So if they are feeling like they're in the yellow light, and I've done this for myself, like if I've woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm like, oh my goodness, and I feel a little anxious or a little bit worried, I don't get out of my bed. I'll kind of sit up and I will start to like fling my arms like quite aggressively. Sometimes I'll do it as if like I'm punching, like if I'm literally like I'm trying to convince my brain because it seems to think that I'm in danger. So I'm like, well, I'll make it think like I'm fighting, right? And I'll do this, and it looks weird. I assume it would look really weird if somebody was awake to see me. So I will do this until my heart rate and my breathing gets fast, right? Then I know I've kind of elevated. And then once I kind of feel tired of flinging, I will put my hand on my chest and a hand on my belly, and I will really focus on controlling my breathing till my breathing rate and my heart rate come back to normal. And then I will lay back down, and I often will find that I'll fall asleep within a relatively quick period of time. Because what I've done is rather than argue with my brain, right, like a hamster on the wheel, I know I'm not going to fall asleep because I'm trying to solve problems I don't really have at 3 o'clock in the morning. I have to remind myself, like, I'm in my bedroom, it's completely dark, whatever you're trying to solve isn't happening in this moment right here. So it's really about getting present, but then I want to speak the language of the body. I want to convince my body and the reptile part of my brain that whatever threat it is perceiving, I have gotten away. So to convince my body that I've actually fought or I've actually run, I elevate my heart rate, I elevate my breathing rate. So physiologically, it thinks I'm doing fight or flight. But because I come back to that really controlled breathing at the end, it's like, oh, I got away, right? And I don't lay back down till my breathing and my heart rate have neutralized back to normal. And it'll be difficult to breathe, right? Because you're like, I'm out of breath. And so don't get too panicked about how it's difficult to breathe and like, your heart's, thudding. It will calm as you continue to breathe calmly. That's my strategy. And I've given that to people. Sometimes if it's like really agitating, I'll tell them, get out of bed and like move your arms and your legs, right, to pump that circulation, and use your body to convince your brain that you got away from the saber-toothed tiger. And thereby you're releasing tension, because if I'm anticipating danger and I don't know if I should run or fight, I'm holding that energy. But if I move the energy, then I'm not stored. I don't have to hold on. I don't have to contain it. I don't have to manage it by holding tension. And if I let go of tension and I get my body relaxed, guess what will follow? My bladder will probably be more relaxed, and then my mind will sort of stop spinning, and then I can get to sleep. So it's kind of weird, but I don't know. I find it really works for me.
That's such an interesting strategy, but hey, if it works, it works.
Yeah.
I know we're both just like
Um,
I'm processing that, but it's everybody listening. If you want to try it and let us know how it goes, I am genuinely curious if this works for more
yeah.
than Madelaine.
Well, I've definitely had people do it in the clinic. Like I've actually had them move. Sometimes I'll get them to push up against the wall, right, to kind of move that energy, that tension, and then I'll have them pause, breathe, and I'm like, "What do you notice about your body?" And I think that's an important key is whenever you're doing a treatment or you're doing a strategy, it's really good to notice like like almost doing a body scan before and doing a body scan after, so your brain can pick up these cues. So you want to slow down long enough to gather that internal interoceptive information so that you can see what's different, not what's better, but what is different. What is different about my experience, after doing a technique?
Yeah, great point. Okay, so you have given so many good tips, so much good information. How can people work with you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I assume your audience is all over the world. So let's just assume if you are in Ontario, Canada, I can work with you virtually as a pelvic floor physiotherapist because that's where I'm licensed to practice. If you're like local to my area, obviously I can treat clients one to one. But of course, that doesn't really allow me to reach all the people across the world. So what I've done is I have created a free mini bladder training. It's called Master Your Bladder, and it's like 7 simple techniques that you can start right away to manage urgency, frequency, and leakage. And so I don't know. I guess should I send you the links? You can find all the
I
links.
have the links. I'm going to put them in the show notes, so we are good on that.
Okay, perfect. And I was just going to say, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I have a YouTube channel. All of the handles are the Pelvic Health Lady. So all the links to everything is going to be there. So that's a great place to start to kind of gather some basic information that is certainly free. And you can follow me on social. I'm very active with posting different techniques and things of that nature. But if you're looking to dive like deeper right into the pillars of like pelvic floor, hands-on techniques, massage techniques, lifestyle, nervous system regulation practices. That I've created a online program. It's called the Better Bladder Method, and it kind of is where I'm putting all of the excuse me, all of the various techniques that I have taught my clients over the past 10 years, and I'll be adding more as I create the videos. I'll be adding more and more. So it's a self-paced program. You have all the pillars there, and you practice some of the techniques, and everything is there. So that program is a paid program. As you know, it can get up there when you're working with somebody one to one. So if somebody's not ready to do the work one to one, maybe they're still a little embarrassed about, doing pelvic floor physio. Like, this is a really great option because you can do it from the comfort of your own home at the pace that is suited to you. So that program is called the Better Bladder Method, and I created a coupon code for your listeners in
Ooh,
case they're
okay.
interested. So I will send you the code, but I just put it as your name, Callie 50, and it'll give people 50% off the online program. And I have made that valid until April 30th of 2025. So give your listeners a couple months to check it out and see if they want to take a look at things from a physiotherapy perspective.
Amazing. All right. Yeah, go check out Madelaine's social media. It's great. You're very
Mhm.
animated. You make me laugh.
Thank you.
And yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really fun conversation, and we are going to help people break up with their toilets for good. That's like my motto of 2025.
I love it.
All right, amazing.